Welcome, friends. I'm so excited to be doing a French dinner workshop with you today. My name is Kathryn Hubert, and I am the chef and owner of Chez, which is a small French-inspired cafe located in downtown Greensboro, North Carolina. A big part of our mission is that we employ adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities, just a little over 50% of our staff, but we are typically open for breakfast and lunch, but also love doing events, private workshops, but we're excited to bring this one to you virtually today. So we are going to be doing a 3-course meal. We're starting with just a really simple French country salad, and then we're doing beef Burgundy, and then finishing off with chocolate mousse. So I've got my vegetables, my herbs and spices out here ready to begin the beef Burgundy prep, and that has the longest cook time, so we're starting with that first so that we can go ahead and get it in the oven, and then we'll start working on our salad and our dessert. I lived in France for a year in the Burgundy region of France, and one of the things that I love about French cooking is that they take a lot of time with their cooking preparation, and then they take a lot of time enjoying their meals. So you'll see that most of our recipes are really simple in nature as far as the ingredients go, but we're looking for quality ingredients prepared with lots of time and love, and then it's designed for you to really gather around a table and enjoy it with your friends and family. To get started, we're going to work on our vegetable prep. So I've got some carrots. All my produce has already been washed, so it's easy to just go ahead and move on with our prep. We've got an onion, we've got mushrooms, I've got fresh rosemary and thyme. I have fresh garlic, and then my dried blends, I have some flour, which we're going to use in a little bit. I have an herb de Provence spice mix, which has more rosemary, thyme, marjoram, lavender, some fennel, and then I've got bay leaves and salt and pepper already ready. So we're going to start with the carrots, and I'm going to cut off just the tips. We want to waste as little bit as possible. Typically, I don't peel the carrots, especially for something like this that's a rustic stew. It's really an extra step and not necessary to waste the carrot or the nutrients that you have in the peels. I'm just going to cut it in half and then quarter it. And then do a small dice. Anytime you're working with a vegetable that has rounded edges, you want to make a flat surface for yourself for safety reasons when you're cutting. So that's the reason for cutting it in half and then half again, so that I now have a flat surface that's not going to slip or fall when I'm trying to get my smaller dice. I've got 3 carrots here. The beauty of cooking is that you can kind of give or take as you want with ingredients that you like or don't like. So I enjoy carrots in the beef Burgundy. If you want less, you can obviously add less. I'm going to get this last big one. The beauty of doing something rustic as well is that you don't have to be totally precise on all of your chops. You're looking for roughly the same size so that they cook to the same, they cook at the same time, but it doesn't have to be perfect. All right, so I've got my carrots here. The mushrooms are already sliced, so I'm not going to worry about those, but we are going to go ahead and cut up the onion. And I am going to use half of this because this is a really big one. But I'm going to cut off the ends like that, and then cut it in half. I find it easier to peel the onion after you've already cut the ends off because you can get under that first layer. And then an easy tip for cutting an onion is that it's already kind of got natural cut lines running down through the onion. So you'll see lines where it naturally forms, and that's a great guide to follow with your knife. And then I'm just going to cut down like this. Again, this is a round item, so I'm getting a flat side, and then chop. And then lastly, I've got a tomato, which we're using a fresh tomato today in place of using tomato paste, because we're going to let this stew for a good long time. And this is just going to be in rough pieces, it's going to break down, especially because it's going to cook for several hours. Like that. This was a good, strong onion. All right, and then we've got our garlic, which has already been peeled, but I'm going to take about 6 or 7 cloves because I love garlic, and we're going to give that a good fine chop as well. Like that. It likes to get stuck to the blade of your knife, so just be on the lookout for that as you go. Going for a rough chop here. It doesn't need to be super fine. And I do not worry about the stems on the garlic. It's totally fine. It'll just blend in with everything else. All right, so we've got our vegetables prepped. I'm going to go ahead and leave the knife here, and then I'm going to carry this over to the stove, and we're going to get started browning our meat. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get our pan heated up so that we can start browning our meat. I am working with a gas stove today, which is my favorite because it's instant heat, instant cool. But if you have an electric stove, you may want to start this step just a minute earlier so that you allow the proper amount of time for your pan to heat up. But I've got just a shallow skillet here. I'm going to start with some bacon that I've already chopped up, and that's going to go in the bottom. And this is going to be the basis for browning our meat, and then we're going to brown our vegetables in this same pot. So you're kind of going to add layers and layers of flavor. Start with the bacon, then we're going to pull that out. Then we're going to add the beef, then we're going to pull that out. Then we're going to add the vegetables, and then we'll end up incorporating it all back in together. So I'm just going to evenly distribute this along the bottom of the pan so that it cooks evenly. It doesn't take too much time. You don't want to cut any of the fat off your bacon ahead of time. Sometimes people like to do that because they don't want it to be super fatty, but that's actually what we're looking for here is we want that fat because that's going to give us the flavor, and that's also going to act as our oil to keep the pan from sticking. I'm going to turn that down just a little bit. And while that's going, I'm going to go ahead and grab my spices and my fresh herbs and my salt and pepper. Okay. I love to work with kosher salt. I like having salt that you can see when you add it so that it's easy to tell how much you're adding. And then I cracked some fresh peppercorns into this and mixed it together, so that makes it really easy to season. We're starting to get some nice color on the bacon here, which is what we're looking for. It's sticking just a little bit on the bottom, but that's not a problem because as we add in our liquids later, all that yummy bacon that's on the bottom that's caramelized is going to get incorporated into our stew. Okay, our next step after that's done is to pull it out. So I've got a bowl already ready with some paper towels. So the bacon's going to come out on this. That way it's just not sitting in the fat. But we're going to actually leave the rest of the bacon grease in the bottom of the pan so that we can add our beef stew meat to that. This was about half a pound of bacon that's in the bottom. Let that go for just another minute. So while we're waiting for the bacon to finish, we're going to go ahead and start stripping the leaves off of our thyme because that takes some time. But we are going to start at the bottom and just work our way up the top. You don't want the stems. Those are really woody, and you're not going to want that in your stew. So we're just going to pull the leaves off. Got a little bit started here, and our bacon is looking great. So we're going to go ahead and pull that out. Looking for just the big pieces. trying to leave as much of the grease as you can in the bottom of the pan. A little bit more. Okay, that is close enough. I'm going to turn this down just a little bit, but as we start adding the bulk of the meat in here, that's going to lower the temperature of the pan, so it's going to be okay. And we're going to add our beef stew that's already been cut up into about 2-inch cubes, evenly in the bottom. You don't want to overcrowd your pan. If you overcrowd it, it's going to be hard to keep the temperature up, which is going to really impact the browning that you get on your meat. So we're going to do this in 2 waves. One more piece in there. So we're looking for brown on all sides here. That's going to help to sear in the moisture and the flavor. And it's also just going to add some really pretty color to our meal. Okay, I'm going to start to turn it over. Got some great color. You want to start roughly in the same spot that you put the meat in to start with, so that the ones that went in first are the ones that get turned first. And then work your way around to the end. Awesome. We're not cooking the meat all the way through here. We're just getting it brown on the edges. Then we're going to pull it out and we're going to start with our vegetables. Give an extra little turn here on a couple pieces. These ones over here are looking good, so I'm going to go ahead and start pulling them out. And I'm just going to add them to the bacon. All right, and now we're going to do round 2. At this point, I'm going to turn my heat back up just a little bit because it cooled down from doing that last batch. And then same thing, looking for all sides to be browned. If you have any large, like gristly pieces or big pieces of fat on your meat, you can cut those off, but otherwise you can leave it as is, because this is going to cook for as long as it is. It's going to tenderize the meat. All right, so same story and situation as last time. We're looking for brown on all sides, starting back with where you put the first pieces down. I can go just a little bit longer. A big piece. All right, we're going to let that go on the second side. Pull it out. It looks like we still have enough bacon grease for our vegetables, at least to start them. But if we need to, you can add a little bit of olive oil, or I've also got a little bit of butter. Okay, and then we're going to pull these pieces out. I'm going to start with my carrots and my onions. Typically when you're sauteing something, you want to start with the ingredients that are going to take the longest to cook. So my mushrooms go in at the very end, since those are the lightest. And I'm going to do the carrots first, then onions, garlic so it doesn't burn, and then we'll go from there. I'm going to add just a little bit of olive oil to this so that it doesn't stick. So I'm gonna let that start to saute and get a little bit brown, and then I'm gonna add the onions, we'll add the garlic, mushrooms, tomatoes, and then we'll add our meat in at the end along with our herbs, our spices, and then our liquid, which today is gonna be both beef broth and red wine. Okay, so I've got my carrots. I'm gonna go ahead and add in my onions. I'm gonna toss to get it all coated in that olive oil. And let that sit for just a minute before we add in our garlic. Starting to smell really good, so at this point you should be starting to feel pretty confident about the meal that you're making. And by the time you eat it, your entire house is gonna smell just delicious. Okay, I'm gonna add my garlic. Get that all stirred in. Working to get a few of those bacon pieces that are stuck on the bottom incorporated because we want all the flavor we can get. Flavor comes from fat, so don't be afraid of it. That's where the deliciousness of your food is going to come from. And then we're going to add our mushrooms. These are going to cook down a lot, so it'll look like a lot in your pan to start with, but don't worry, it'll feel proportionate by the time you're done. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and add my butter. Mushrooms are amazing because they're like little sponges, so they're just going to soak up all the flavor around them. So at this point, adding my 2 tablespoons of butter, the mushrooms are really going to absorb that and be delicious. But this is also going to give you the base that I need for when I add my flour, so that my flour has something to adhere to. I'm going to stir that in. Butter has a really low melting point. So at this point, there's enough going on that the butter's not going to burn, but that's why I don't ever fry something in just butter. I usually add a little bit of oil so that you don't burn something at the beginning. All right, and then we're going to add our tomatoes. Again, we're doing fresh tomatoes here today, but you also could use tomato paste in place. But as we talked about a little bit earlier, we're looking for layers upon layers of flavor, and tomatoes add just a robust depth to your flavors. There's a complexity that it adds that you won't get otherwise. A little bit of sweet, a little bit of acidity. All right, so these tomatoes are going to continue to break down over the course of the stew, but at this point we can add in our meat. Without the paper towels, it should all come out pretty easily at the bottom. Stir that all together. Trying to keep it in the pan. Okay, at this point, we're going to add just a little bit of flour. That's going to help so that our stew really is stew-like and not just a thin broth. We're going to go for just a couple tablespoons. I'm not super exact when it comes to cooking, which is why I like cooking and not baking, because it gives you room to play. So eyeballing is fine. The flour is going to get soaked up by the juices of our vegetables and by the butter and the oil that we already have in here. And now we're at a good point to go ahead and start adding our liquid. So we've got beef broth, which you can either purchase or you can make from scratch. We're going to use a little less beef broth than we are the red wine. So I've got probably about 2 cups of broth in here at this point. And then I'm going to add about 3 cups of red wine. You may, as the day goes on and this continues to simmer and cook, realize that you need to add more liquid. So don't use all of your wine and broth at the beginning. You can hold back just a little bit and keep some in reserve and add throughout the day as needed. Go for just a little bit more. The acid in the wine is also going to help to tenderize your meat, break it down so that by the time you eat this, it is just falling apart. All right, I'm going to turn the heat down. We're going to go ahead and start adding some of our seasonings. So I've got salt and pepper here. Enough to help with the flavors to start, and then we can add more to taste later. A little bit of our dried spice mix. Got fresh thyme. And then we've also got some rosemary, which I'm going to put whole sprigs in there for now. We can add some more fresh chopped later. But this is going to help steep in there and impart the flavor. Stir that in. And then lastly, we're going to add just a few bay leaves, again, to release flavor as it's cooking. And then we're going to stop. So at this point, you can either continue to simmer on low over the stove, or what we're going to do is we're actually going to cover and put it in the oven. It's going to achieve the same effect either way, but this way we don't have to worry about it. We've got the oven on low. We're going to put it in there. It's just going to do its thing for about 3 or 4 hours, and then we'll be ready to move on to the next step. All right, so we're moving on to our salad. And since this is our first course and it's also followed by a pretty heavy second course with the beef Burgundy, we're gonna go super light on our salad. So we're just gonna do a dressing with lemon zest and juice, olive oil, salt and pepper. I've got some fresh herbs that we're gonna mix into the greens, and then we've got a tomato to just finish it off. So here we've got our spring mix, which has already been washed. It's a variety of different lettuces. And then we're gonna start zesting the lemon. So when you zest, you want just the colorful part of the rind. If you get down to the white part, that's what's super bitter. So don't go too heavy-handed on this. But this is going to add so much extra flavor to your dressing and just make it pop. Like that. And we're going to go ahead and juice it. When I juice lemons, I do it over my hand so that the seeds fall into my hand and not into the salad. And you want to put your lemon juice in first, because if you put your oil first, that's going to coat your greens, and then the lemon juice is just going to run off of it. You're not going to get the full flavor. So we've got that there. We're going to add some fresh herbs. I've got fresh thyme, fresh oregano, and fresh basil. The thyme is going to be great just as it is with the little leaves, stripping it off like we did for the beef Burgundy. Do a couple of sprigs. And then we're going to move on to the oregano and basil. Those we're actually going to chop. So I'm going to pull the leaves off. Like this. These are tender little leaves, so I don't need to fold them over or anything before I chop them. And the same with the oregano. Like that. We're just going to give this a little bit of a chop here to break it up so that it's not too overbearing or intensive when you put it into your salad. but it's going to add a lot of pungent flavor. Still keeping it light and fresh though. Chop it up like that. I'm going to add to our greens. We're going to add some salt and pepper. And then drizzle a little bit of olive oil. Okay, we're going to toss that all together. Get it nicely coated. You want to make sure that your lettuce, if you've just washed it, is dry before you do this. Otherwise, your dressing is not going to adhere to the leaves. We're going to put our greens in the bowl. And then just add a few slices of tomato on the top. You want to make sure if you're adding something heavy like a tomato that your greens are strong enough to support it. A little bit more salt and pepper. And that's it. That's our salad. All right, we are at the fun part of our meal. We are getting ready to make the dessert. We are doing chocolate mousse, which this is a very simple chocolate mousse recipe. It just has heavy cream, dark chocolate, a little bit of powdered sugar, and that's it. We're gonna whip our heavy cream and we're gonna melt our dark chocolate, and then we're gonna combine the two together. So I've got a double boiler going on here. There's just a little bit of water at the bottom of my pot, about 1/2 inch. That's gonna be enough to create a steam bath for my stainless steel bowl, but not so much that the bowl is actually sitting in any water. So I've got a scale over here. It's zeroed out to take into account the weight of the bowl. And I'm going to do equal parts chocolate, equal parts cream. I'm going to do 1 cup of heavy cream and put it in my mixer. Right here. And then I'm going to weigh my chocolate out. It was a little too much. We're going to take a little bit out. Okay? And then my chocolate is going to go on top of the double boiler. We're going to wait for that to melt. And while that's melting, we're going to go ahead and whip the cream with just a little bit of powdered sugar. I've just found that powdered sugar incorporates into the cream better than granulated sugar. We're just going to let that go to town. The only things to be careful of with your chocolate when you're melting it is that you want everything to be super dry. Water is the enemy of chocolate when it comes to melting it. That's what makes it seize up, and you can't do anything with it really at that point. So I made sure that my bowl is super dry, and we're just going to let this melt until it's nice and smooth. All right, I'm going to turn this up. We're looking for a soft peak here on the whipped cream. All right, that's just about perfect. It's a good idea to keep an eye on your whipped cream as you're going, because if you whip it too far, then you'll end up with butter, which is delicious, but not what we're going for this recipe. I'm going to continue to let this melt. So you've got our cream ready. I'm going to pull a little bit of this mixture out, and we're going to save that as garnish on the top. So just a little bit, not much. Keep that off to the side. Our chocolate is nice and melted here. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this off. We're going to pull our bowl off. And then we're gonna add the whipped cream mixture to our melted chocolate. We're gonna stir that together. The cold fat with the warm chocolate together is gonna form our mousse. This is easiest to do with a whisk so that you really get it incorporated together. Making sure to get down to the bottom so that we don't leave any of that good chocolate unfolded in. So that's it, it's all incorporated. We can now put this into a serving bowl, garnish with the whipped cream, and then if you want to add any fresh fruit to the top, it makes a really nice finishing touch. All right, we are ready to eat. So we have our finished product, we have our salad, we have our dessert, and we have our beef burgundy, which is cooked to tender perfection at this point. So I'm gonna take the lid off. Remember that we put full sprigs of rosemary in there earlier, so we're gonna go ahead and take those out at this point. We don't need them anymore. And you can also do this with your bay leaves if you find them as you go. Sometimes they get hidden in there. And we're gonna go ahead and dish up. Got some lovely herbs, the mushrooms, the beef is super tender, it's falling apart. We're just gonna wipe the side of the bowl. To make sure we're pretty here. And then garnish with just a couple little sprigs of rosemary on the top. So thank you for sticking with me all this time, for walking through all the different courses. This meal is best when eaten one course at a time. We encourage you to sit down, to enjoy it, to gather around the table with your family, with your friends. Go one course at a time and space it out. There's no rush. We literally have nowhere to be. Just enjoy your meal and your time together.